Today we're going to take a look at the 2022 Honda Foreman and Rubicon 520 ATV model lineup. We're going to break down the model lineup and explain the differences and what features you can and cannot get between the Foreman and Rubicons. But first, if you find any info in this video helpful, please take a second and hit the like button. Liking the video and commenting below really helps with growing this channel through YouTube's algorithm, and I really appreciate the help. Now, let's touch on a few things to save me some time later on in the video. All of these models have selectable four-wheel drive and a differential lock. All of them share the 518cc engine that Honda calls a 520, and if I say DCT, that means it has an automatic transmission. More specifically, a dual clutch transmission, which is the type of automatic transmission used. EPS is short for electric power steering, and ES means electric shift, which is one of their other transmission types next to the DCT automatic and your plain Jane foot shift transmission. One more thing to note, all Rubicon models have independent rear suspension and all Foreman models have a straight axle. And now we'll jump into one more thing before we get into the models. When talking about model IDs, TRX is generic for ATV. The next number is the engine size, so we'll throw 520 in there. Then you have the letter F for four-wheel drive. The next letter tells you its transmission. If it's an M, that means that it has the manual shift transmission or foot shift, as some people call it, while the letter A would mean it's an automatic and E would mean electric shift. Then you have the letter 1, 2, or 5, 6, and 7. The 1 means it has a straight axle without EPS. The 2 means a straight axle with EPS, while the 5 means IRS without EPS, 6 means IRS with EPS, and 7 means it's a deluxe model which has IRS and EPS. Now it may sound confusing, but once you get it down, you'll be able to tell what features a model has just by its model ID. And now let's jump into the 2022 Foreman model lineup. You have 3 different Foreman models to choose from. The first is called the FourTrax Foreman, and it's the plain Jane manual shift model at $74.99, and its model ID is TRX520 FM1. The second model in the Foreman lineup is taking that exact same manual shift model we just talked about and adding EPS, so it's called the FourTrax Foreman EPS, and everything else stays the same, and your price tag went up $700 to $81.99. And this model's ID is TRX520 FM2. Then your third and final option in the Foreman lineup is called the FourTrax Foreman ES EPS, and it's priced at $84.49. This model's ID is TRX520 FE2. This model takes away the foot shift transmission and adds electric shift, hence the ES part, and you now change gears by clicking the up and down arrows on the left side of the handlebar. And by default, you also get EPS. Honda used to build a standard ES model without EPS, but they dropped it a few years ago. And that's all 3 of the Foreman models in the 2022 model lineup. Now let's jump into the Rubicon model lineup, and technically Honda calls them Foreman Rubicons. The first model is called the FourTrax Foreman Rubicon EPS, and this is the foot shift model with power steering. It's priced at $88.99, and the model ID is TRX520 FM6. The next one is called the FourTrax Foreman Rubicon DCT, and this replaces the manual shift transmission from the model before with the dual clutch automatic transmission that also gives you a low range that the manual shift model does not have. With all DCT models, you can switch from fully automatic mode over to ESP for electric shift program. And that way you can manually click up and down through the gears like an electric shift model, but better. And to note, all Rubicon DCT models have the low range feature that we just mentioned. This model also removes EPS that was on the prior model, and normally that would bring the price down, but we're adding the more expensive transmission, so your price only drops $100 down to $87.99, and its model ID is TRX520 FA5. The third model is called the FourTrax Foreman Rubicon DCT EPS, and it's the exact same model we just talked about, but we're adding EPS back into the mix, and that bumps your price up $700 to $94.99, while everything else stays the same. and its model ID is TRX520 FA6. And the fourth Rubicon model is taking the last model we just covered and adding some aesthetic bells and whistles with no mechanical changes. It's called the FourTrax Foreman Rubicon Deluxe DCT EPS. What's so deluxe about it? Well, you get aluminum wheels instead of steel, and you also get painted plastics or the phantom camo finish and color match suspension. The deluxe model will set you back an additional $500 over the previous model, bringing it up to $99.99, and its model ID is TRX520 FA7. And that's all 4 of the Rubicon models in the 2022 lineup. Now, what else is different between them? With the Foreman having a straight axle in the back, you have 7.3 inches of travel, while the Rubicon's independent rear suspension, IRS, coming in with 8.5 inches of travel, and both have the same 7.3 inches up front. The Foreman has 7.5 inches of ground clearance compared to the 9.4 on the Rubicon. Towing capacity on the Foreman is 848 pounds, while the Rubicon jumps up to 1,322. The Foreman has an 88 and 176 pound weight capacity on the front and rear racks, whereas the Rubicon comes in at 99 and 187. They both have disc brakes up front, but out back on the Foreman is a sealed 160mm mechanical drum brake, whereas the Rubicon has a 170mm disc with a single hydraulic caliper. And all models have the same size tires with a 25 by 8 by 12 up front and 25 by 10 by 12s in the rear, while the Rubicons do have a slightly more aggressive Maxxis tire. Due to their overall measurements being slightly different if you compare their spec sheets, the Rubicon does have a wider 11.5 foot turning radius compared to 10.5 feet on the Foreman. And a couple more things to keep in mind before we finish off the video. If you go with a model that has phantom camo as an option, it will add $500 to your price tag, except for on the Rubicon Deluxe, as you're swapping out the painted finish for camo, so the price stays the same. Also, if you really want painted plastics, you only have that option on the Rubicon, not the Foreman. And on the Rubicon, the only models you can get paint on would be the Rubicon EPS with the matte forged bronze paint, or the matte blue metallic paint on the Rubicon Deluxe DCT EPS model. But for the Rubicon EPS, it'll set you back an additional $500, just like if you were to go with the camo finish. And that's a quick overview of the different Foreman and Rubicon models, as well as what some of their differences are and what sets them apart from each other. I hope the info was of some help to someone. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Thanks again for watching and for all the support lately. I really appreciate it, and we'll see you in the next one.